The AHRC are funding this research grant with the idea of bringing back into public understanding heritage of comics that were produced at the time of the World Wars and recuperating the record of publications and attitudes that have been forgotten. The project's research is really timely because we have two major anniversaries coming up. The centenary of the outbreak of the First World War, which will be in 2014, and the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, which will be in 2015. So that means there'll be a lot of public interest and media coverage of the themes we're doing. The AHRC is going to get impact in two ways. Firstly, academic impact, because its interdisciplinary nature means that academics can hopefully view comic strips as a cultural record. It's an opportunity to appreciate heritage at a time when everybody will want to know about it. And what we often don't get from other formats is that at a glance appreciation of what people were thinking of popular culture at the time. A lot of the material we use has been forgotten. And it's mouldering away, maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's mouldering away in archives, in libraries, old newspapers, for instance, going brown. Virtually nothing is digitalised of what we're doing, because what we're trying to find is examples of comic strips, characters, publications that people have forgotten about because they know they are no longer brought out. In the case of the First World War, the soldiers themselves who produced their own trench publications in which sometimes, not always, they did cartoons. And some of those cartoons were more than one panel, and so they told a narrative. And there we can see part of the origins, or an aspect of the origins of the comic strip. There were comic strips before the First World War, but they were aimed mainly at children. So they had kiddie titles such as Puck, for instance. During the First World War, adults began to take an interest in the comic strip format and in cartoons. Cartoons became hugely important as a publication medium, and they weren't censored in the same way that print was. So there were war cartoonists that were hugely prolific. Some characters that had been invented just before the Second World War, in the comic strip itself, went off to war. An example in Britain would be in the Daily Mirror, Jane, who was a very popular comic strip character. Jane became Jane at war, and Norman Petz, the artist, had her running a cafe for the NAFI, for the troops, but she was secretly a spy. But she appeared in uniform, very sexy of course still, but she appeared in uniform and she did things for the war. So comic strip characters become part of the war, and new comic strips are also brought out during both wars.
Well, in 2014 we're going to be doing an exhibition on World War I and comics and cartoons, and then in 2015 we'll be taking the same approach to the Second World War. And then we're also hoping that we'll be doing some workshops for young people, both in cartooning and comics and animation, and teaching them how to create their own narratives.
We get all ages visiting the Cartoon Museum for workshops. It can really vary from day to day, but we get primary schools, secondary schools, college students, sometimes even groups of pensioners, and we teach adults here in the evening as well.
We're also exploring perhaps using the great funding that we have from the AHRC for these exhibitions to leverage other funding from some other organisations so that we can roll out a wider programme to schools and young people both in 2014 and 2015.
In the instance of cartoons about World War I, for instance, we might be attempting to get them to draw World War I Tommies, for instance, so they could then, by studying the details on the cartoons that we'll have in the exhibition, they can then begin to build their own cartoon version of a hapless World War I soldier. There he is, looking a little bit worried as he's heading out to the Somme.
The project Comics and the World Wars, A Cultural Record brings together a whole range of different disciplines. We're interdisciplinary, and it's only by having that range that you can fully understand the format and what we're doing. Our research can be of use to a number of different fields of study. In research, we've been able to feature some most unlikely publications. I'm thinking, for instance, of Paroles d'Étoile, which is a French publication, comic strip book, which means the Star of David. Now, these children were separated from their Jewish parents. Their parents usually ended up in Auschwitz, and the children were sent to different families to live with, and often given false identities so that they wouldn't be arrested. But these things are magic because you can see in a picture what it would take 1,000 words. When it tells a story as well, with a sequential narrative, and when there are some captions, or maybe some speech balloons, and if there's a well-known character that you can identify with, and that character is saying something that's a common experience, then you have a genuine form of popular culture.